double dip tonight, time permitting. I'm going to try to get two different topics in. The first one is the crowds that followed him. We are studying from a geographic and cultural perspective. I'd like to know, though, first of all, is there anything you're taking away from this class? Anything that seems to be hitting you that you've not thought of before, or what are you taking away so far?
I think the location.
The location?
The location of everything. In my mind, I had a little bitty town now.
I agree. I don't think we fully grasp that location and the place he lived and walked and ministered. It was very different than we picture because of Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
They tainted us with their movies.
I didn't realize how little time he spent in Jerusalem.
Yes. His primary ministry way up there in Galilee and around the sea mostly. And then, anything else?
I think it's interesting, depending on what location he was at, how he preached the message.
Okay.
Based upon the people he
Yes.
was speaking with.
Yes, and we're going to start seeing that next week in particular. But before I give too many cookies away about next week, I need to get in this week or we won't finish this week. So, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that in last week's lesson about him, they were trying to stone him for what he had said. And Stephen had said the same thing that he said, that Jesus said in Stephen's sermon.
Yes?
And they got it done. And they got it done.
That's right. Exactly right. He wasn't able to kind of part the crowd and walk out.
But it was the same message.
Same message. All right. No Facebook, no Twitter. And yet Jesus' reputation spread hither and yon, seemingly with the ease of modern communication technology. I mean, it spread like wildfire. His reputation just kept growing. It astonished his friends, his disciples. It confounded his enemies. And his reputation just grew and grew and grew. And the multitudes followed at larger and larger scales. Galilee couldn't contain his fame. You know, most of his ministry is way up there at the top. I purposely went without the screen tonight because I want you to start memorizing that map. We'll go back to it. But I wanted you to remember, Sea of Galilee, way up at the top. Northeast corner, right? Capernaum is his hometown, his new makeshift home base of operation. It's at the far top corner, again, northeast corner of the Sea of Galilee, and the line, the border is right there. Spreads like wildfire. His reputation beyond just Galilee. It goes down into Samaria. Remember, he's already talked to the woman at the well. Word spreads there. It's spreading down in Judea. It's spreading all over the place. It's even spreading way over, if you go toward the Mediterranean, which is west, it's spreading that way. If you go over into Perea, Gaulonitis, to the east, it's spreading that way. Jesus, the word about him, you can't contain it. So it's going near and far, hither and yon, here and there, wherever. So I want to look. Let's go to Matthew 25. We're going to look at two or three passages here just for a moment that tell us what kinds of people are following him and where they're from. I'm sorry, it's verse 25, but it's chapter 4. Matthew 4.
I was about to say, sheep and goats. That's only two kinds of people.
Yeah. Matthew 4. I'm going to begin with verse 23. And he went throughout all Galilee. Now where's Galilee? Picture the map. It's at the top. He went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all, where? Syria. Now where's that? Well, pardon? It's not in Galilee, is it? Okay. In all Syria. Any other translations? Or they all say Syria? And they brought him all the sick, and those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, epileptics, and paralytics, and he healed them. Now watch verse 25. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis. We're going to talk about that momentarily in just a moment, but that's not in Galilee, or at least not right there by Capernaum. From Jerusalem, from Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. I've got a little inset map. It doesn't show any of those except Galilee, but Decapolis is southeast of the Sea of Galilee, way down just east of Scythopolis, across the Jordan, into foreign territory. My point is, you've got people coming in that are both, this is my guess, both Jew and Gentile. I think we have a whole lot more Gentile audience that follows Jesus around than we will give credit. Now, we know that some Jews lived in these foreign, if you will, foreign places outside of Israel, such as the Decapolis, such as Perea, perhaps as far away as Syria. But even Galilee is known as Galilee of the Gentiles. The message all along has been for anyone, everyone, not just the Jews. I think we fail to recognize just maybe how often he had a Gentile audience. Go to Mark now. Chapter 3. Verse 7. Mark 3, beginning with verse 7. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea. So where is he? Most likely the Sea of Galilee. And a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and what's the next one? Idumea, Tyre, and Sidon. And from beyond the Jordan. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. When it says great crowd, and you start listing all various countries, what kind of crowd do you picture in your mind?
Thousands come to eat, so they're probably expecting,
Yeah, thousands came to eat the fish fry, remember that? Or maybe they weren't fried. I just don't think we give it enough credit for how large the crowds were and how diverse they were. Let's go to Luke, chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, beginning with verse 17. And this report, this is a report of Jesus raising the widow's son from the dead. And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. Okay, that one doesn't list as many places, but you get the idea. The word is spreading. So we have Jerusalem. Okay, you have your core group of Jewish people in Jerusalem, and then it broadens to Judea, and you likely have mostly Jews down there in Judea as well. And then you have up there in Galilee, which is known as Galilee of the Gentiles, a large Jewish population, but also a very large international population. You had what else? You had the Decapolis, which we'll talk about in a moment. Not from Judea, but across the Jordan from Judea. Some Jewish population probably, but mostly is going to be Gentile. We had Tyre and Sidon. We had Idumea. Am I leaving any out that you can remember? Syria. We had Syria. We had surrounding country. This is what I found interesting, and it dawned on me today as I was looking at a map. There is one glaring omission. What is it? Pardon? Well, it did mention Jerusalem, but not as often as you'd think, but it does. But there's one more. Samaria. Not even mentioned, right? Why do you think that is? Do you think nobody ventured outside of Samaria to see him? Because I think probably they did. It's probably the antipathy, we'll call it, the fighting between the Jews and the Samaritans, the dislike, and even Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics, don't even want to mention Samaria. That's my guess. Because I just feel like, with the conversation with the woman and the word spread, and I think people went out and watched him, especially if he was right there close, maybe by Perea. I don't think we mentioned that one yet. There's passages that talk about him being at Perea, just beyond the Jordan. Multitudes followed, at least at his baptism. That's pretty much right there. I mean, you could stand on the riverbank in Samaria and watch. And what's the common element? What is really bringing the crowds to him? The miracles. The miracles. Even a Gentile likes a good miracle. Yeah. It was the magnet that attracted the crowds, local and foreign. It was also the way he taught. Remember, we talked about that in the first lesson. It was also, or the second lesson, it was that authority. It was that something about him. He taught differently than everyone else. Everything about him was just different. Probably except the way he looked. Well, he became popular very quickly. His teachings, his miracles left people speechless. And it all focuses, the great majority, not all of it, but the great majority, way up there in the corner, near Capernaum, right on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Someone did a study and tried to figure it out. I didn't go in and check it, but I think I read today about 80% of his miracles happened in, on, around the Sea of Galilee. That's right on the border. It's an international crossing. Lots and lots of people. Word spreads fast. Now, another thought dawned on me as I was looking at a map, and if you've got a good map, that highway that goes from Capernaum over into Perea, goes right down to a little city you may have heard of called Caesarea Philippi. One Apostle Paul will go at some point and preach and be received very, very, very well. Do you think because maybe they've heard a little bit already? Being such an international place, do you think some of these people have heard little bits and pieces of this Jesus, the Messiah, already? As Paul goes out to the other rest of the world. Tyre and Sidon. You don't have to travel from Capernaum to Tyre and Sidon via Caesarea Philippi, but most people do, because it's a much better route, much more international travel. More direct routes exist. Go with me to Matthew 15. We may not get to our second topic till next week, but we'll get to it. It's a good one. Matthew 15, verse 21. Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Even Jesus goes there. And behold, what kind of woman? Canaanite woman from that region came out. Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. He did not answer her a word. Okay, and it goes on, and you know the story. Crumbs to the dogs and all of that. But my point is, you have a map. Where in the world is Tyre, Sidon? Tyre and Sidon. Phoenicia. Where and what? Pardon? Way up north and way over on the Mediterranean coastline. They're incredible port cities. They're huge. Financial and travel and so on and so forth. Why is Jesus way up there? What kind of audience would he find up there? Travelers, sailors, travelers across the world, Mediterranean. We don't think of these things when we're just reading the story. The Decapolis, again, way down there, south of the Sea of Galilee. It means 10 cities, but if you start counting them, there's a few more than 10. Maybe originally there was 10 when it got its name. It's not in Israel either. So let me ask you as we wrap this part of the story up, who is Jesus' audience?
Red, yellow, black, and white.
Red, yellow, black, and white. Everybody.
John's like that in the world.
That's why he came, yes. It's exactly why he came into the world. So think of that and keep that in mind. He chooses to do ministry not down there in Jerusalem. I mean, he does some there, but the great majority is to the world.
And it was, I know we can only go by what we have record of, 80% on the Sea of Galilee. That's what was recorded.
Yes, that's what's recorded. And John makes clear there's a whole bunch more.
Being a Canaanite woman, Canaan, they were known for having a bunch of false gods.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
He said, maybe, just like he was Elijah, you call your doctor.
Yes, yes.
But, to me, he's softening it up for all the disciples whenever they went.
Yeah. That was the point I was hoping to get across. I think many of these places have already heard. It's not brand new to them. And that's a great segue, bringing up the Canaanite woman and the other gods. Let's go to the second story now. I'm going to try to fit it in. It's a good one. It's the healing of the man crippled with an infirmity for 38 years. He's at the pool of Bethesda. It is the third miracle mentioned in the Gospel of John. We're in John chapter 5. Give me a moment to get over there. John chapter 5, the first, half of the chapter or so, 18, 20 verses. John chapter 5. Now, I think it's interesting and important before you study John's miracles to remember he tells us why he wrote his book. At the end of the book, do you remember what he said? So that you'll believe. In fact, John 20, beginning with verse 30, says, "Therefore many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in His name." He tells you, I have hand-selected a few that will convince you He is the Son of God. That being the case, this is the third one he tells. It's a sign that he chose to demonstrate Jesus is infinitely superior to any pagan healing god. Now I'm going to give you two options. You can choose which one. I have made my choice. You'll probably be able to tell which one it is. There's the traditional rendering of John 5, and then there is another option that archaeology has perhaps opened us up to in fairly recent years. This is one of the few miracles you can narrow down to the exact day on the calendar. Isn't that cool? I mean, you can get a calendar and say it happened on this day. Scholars have debated, but they have come up with I don't know that you'll ever have anything 100% conclusive when it comes to scholars, but most agree. John chapter 5 and verse 1, after this there was a feast of the Jews. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. If you go back to chapter 4, now keep in mind the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Bible is not written chronologically. If you have a chronological Bible, that becomes abundantly clear if you're trying to find something. But sometimes it will kind of give you clues. We're writing chronologically for the moment. And if you go to John chapter 4, the conversation with the Samaritan woman takes place during the preparation for Passover. That in turn takes place 60 days I forgot my train of thought. But anyway, you know the Passover. So we're getting a time frame on the calendar. John 4 and verse 35 states there are 4 months before the grain harvest. Okay, these are little clues that help you get a calendar and look at it and say, okay, we got preparation for Passover. We've got 4 months until the harvest. The harvest begins around Pentecost. If you go forward to John chapter 6, verse 4 states, Passover is near at hand. Now back to John 5 and verse 1, because we have a early date and we have a later date. We have a preparation for Passover and we have a Pentecost. This falls somewhere in between. What's the one festival that happens in between? Someday we'll do a study of the festivals. I love that. Really has a lot of depth and meaning, and it helps you understand the calendar and a lot of things about the Jewish holidays. But there's one festival in between those two. It's the festival of Purim. You know what that is? You know what's associated with?
Esther.
Yes, the book of Esther. Well, in AD 28 happens to be the only one in the calendar in which Jesus lives that falls on Shabbat. That's why I say you can look at a calendar and say, okay, there was only 1 year that Jesus was doing his ministry where that happens, and it was this one. So you can literally put your finger on that Purim that happens on Shabbat, John 5 and verse 9, verse 15, between AD 25 and AD 35, and it's in AD 28. So you can look at an AD 28 calendar, find Purim. This is the day Jesus healed the gentleman at the pool of Bethesda. That doesn't happen often, where you can just nail it down on a calendar. Now, John 5 and verse 2, let me read it first. Begin with verse 1. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic, your translation may say in Hebrew, or the Hebrew tongue. It's called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there, by the way, the first 4 verses, filled with troublesome, that's not a solid translation, is what I'm trying to say. Verse 5, one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." And some of you are looking at your Bible, especially if you're an older translation, you say, "Wait a minute, you just forgot something important." What was it?
Verse 4.
Which says, the angel of the Lord, or depending on your translation, only a very few translations have angel of the Lord, because the of the Lord's actually not there. It's just angel. All right, so the Jews, I skipped a couple verses here. Let me go back. Verse 7, the sick man answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. There's the Shabbat. There's the feast is on the Sabbath. Tell me in your mind what's going on. Traditional translation or interpretation is, you got this pool. Every once in a while, an angel of the Lord comes down, stirs it up. First one in is the lottery winner. They get healed. Everybody else gets left out. Is that the way you see it? Does that sound like an angel of the Lord or something that God would do? I've always struggled with that.
Does it really happen? I mean, the stirring, the first one goes in there.
Oh, I believe it really happened because it's in Scripture, but
Yeah, no.
that rendering, it's almost blaming God, or it's the God lottery. I'm going to stir up the water. First one in, you get healed. Now everybody else gets left out.
Well, I'm not going to be argumentative about that, but that's the way Jesus operated.
It was kind of that way. He didn't heal everybody, did he? He did not. But he healed many.
And if you would use a little logic there, you would have a thought of preparation, otherwise be watchful.
Sure, there's some application that can be made that way. And I'm not going to argue against it. I'm just going to give you option 2 now. For time's sake, I got to hurry. Verse 2 says, "There is by the sheep pool a place that is called in the Hebrew or Aramaic tongue Bethesda." The sheep pool has been identified by most biblical and archaeological scholars. There are twin pools just north of the Temple Mount. They're pretty sure this is the ones that we're talking about here. The construction of the North Pool most likely began in the Iron Age. It was a dam across the Bethesda Valley. It caught the runoff from the rain. It fed into a lower pool, and the lower pool is where they perform their Jewish ritual baths, cleansings. We would call them baptisms, so on and so forth. Mentioned in Isaiah 7 and verse 3, it's the upper pool where the prophet Isaiah met King Ahaz. Goes all the way back many, many years. These two large pools have been identified as those ritualistic pools, large basins. In all probability, now this is my bias coming out, my preference coming out, I don't think this took place there. The wording in these first 4 verses is difficult, but the one thing that is clear is Bethesda. Any idea what Bethesda means? 2 words.
House of mercy.
House of mercy. Yeah, Beth, which is, or Bat, is house. Hesed is mercy. House of mercy. It says it took place by this pool at a place called Bethesda. A more literal rendering, it took place by the pools at a place called Bethesda, a place called House of Mercy. They've also uncovered a pagan shrine right there. Now, we said Canaanite woman, false gods. That wasn't just over in Tyre and Sidon. False gods were worshipped all over. And right there in Jerusalem, it's actually on the outskirts of Jerusalem, is a cave dwelling that they have found right beside those pools, just north of the Temple Mount, that was to a pagan deity, and I cannot remember the name, and it changed a couple of times through the years, but carvings and whatnot, and they found a big foot, a human foot. That was a ritual something. And also there is inside it a carving of a human head, but the body is a snake. And that's the god. That's that pagan god. And it is known as, guess what? The carvings call it Bethesda, House of Mercy. Now bear with me just a moment. You go down into this cave, 3 or 4 steps down. There were these little pools, these little cubicles, and because of earthquakes or because of perhaps, in my opinion, if you're going to believe in good angels, for faith to be real, you got to believe in bad angels. It could be, it doesn't say, when it says angel of the Lord, remember, of the Lord is not there. It's just angel. And by context, often the word angel is there. You've got to determine good angel, bad angel. In many, several places. What if Jesus is going to a place in Jerusalem, and John has already told us, I've hand-selected these miracles to show you Jesus is God. How does John start out? John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he goes on down, and he put on flesh. And Jesus goes into the house of mercy on the festival of Purim. What did you do in the festival of Purim? Traditionally, you did a kind act for a stranger. From the book of Esther. He goes into this pagan shrine, finds someone who has been there perhaps longest. He's been an invalid for 38 years. Doesn't have any help. Asks the man, and by the way, don't let it don't let it be lost. This is probably a pagan believer. But think about the book of Esther. What is the book of Esther about? Unbelievers being offered mercy. Mordecai, Esther, they're unbelievers. They have chosen to stay in a foreign land. They're outside the will of God. But He loves them anyway. Wants to save His people anyway. And that's what Jesus is doing the exact same thing on that day, which would be celebrating that very thing. So what if He goes into this pagan shrine, goes up to someone who's been there the longest, and everybody there knows he can't move. He's been here years and years and years and years. And Jesus asked one question. What was it?
Do you want to be what?
Yeah, He didn't ask, do you believe? He already knew the answer to that, in my opinion. The answer was no. Well, he believed in the pagan stirring of the waters. Do you want to be made well? Let me show you who's really God.
Did he know who Jesus was?
Not initially, but the text even tells us that. He says, I don't know who healed me.
Yeah.
And then he goes back and finds out, and then goes rat Jesus out, and Jesus comes back and says, you better stop singing or something else is going to have to be.
That's right. Do you want to be made well? Yes. And what does He tell him to do? Yeah, notice this time He didn't say your sins are forgiven. This time He didn't say, He always has choices of what to say. And this time He simply said, well, take up your bed and walk.
It was on the Sabbath, and everyone was very excited because of the carrying of the bed on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So obviously there were Jews around, and
It's right outside the Temple Mount, literally.
and because it was that type of holiday, honestly, Jesus was there because of the holiday, and also all the other Jews were too.
Yes.
So in that respect, I'd probably assume he had some knowledge of the law.
Yes.
You think?
Yes. And keep in mind, the multitudes following Him includes the scribes and Pharisees. And they're watching. They're watching His every move. And they're finding fault. To me, this hammers home the thing we've been talking about tonight. Even down in Jerusalem, who was His ministry to? Everybody. People of the world. Humans. Next week, we're going to shift a little. We're going to the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And we're going to shift from geographic locations specifically to His teachings and start looking at how His teachings apply geographically. Just like this one, that in my opinion, if you look at the geography and you look at culture and you look at some archaeology and find out what they're finding, it can really change the way you see Scripture. We see it in a very biased, very slanted, Western way. And we miss so much.
This right here, they're waiting for the waters to be stirred. I wonder if this is kind of like Jesus doing a wordplay with the water, as He tells the Samaritan woman, I'm the living water.
Could be. There's no doubt He uses water as a symbol of purification.
Well, definitely He's saying, I don't need to wait on the angel.
That's right. And that's a very good
They
point.
are.
His healing is not limited.
I take it as He is the angel in this situation.
Yes.
Like I'm the angel that you're waiting on.
Yes.
And this time you don't even have to walk to get here.
Yes. And there is a word play. If you really want to be in the house of mercy, let me show you where it really is. It's not here where you have to wait on a lottery ticket.
Well, obviously, there was no accident, Jesus was there. And then obviously it had something to do with past occurrences. Good angel, bad angel. Obviously, there had been it stirring at various times, and there must have been some kind of results. Obviously positive results, so or they wouldn't have been there. So Jesus knew all of that, and therefore made himself his appearance there for that purpose. Otherwise, it never been in the scripture.
That's right. That's right. But because of it, you've got more believers, more followers, more multitudes. Any other final thoughts?